Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aparna, and I thank you all for joining us today for the second episode of Saturday Sojourns. Last time, we looked at the beginnings, certain inspirations, and various influences on the profession in the subcontinent and the way forward while we were in conversation with the presenters from Pakistan and Nepal. Today, we will be focusing on praxis, dialogue, and trajectory in the Indian context to take these conversations forward with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. The Indian subcontinent, a land of shared histories, has shaped our sensibilities and tastes pertaining to design and use of outdoor space, and along with it, imparted a unique identity. The medieval times saw many garden traditions evolve across the country, captured in miniature paintings and a few well preserved sites. Colonization at a subcontinent level has influenced and subsumed the many ways of looking at land and garden and introduced a typological and stylized approach. During the colonial period, our very own notions of garden in the subcontinent were supplanted with the picturesque that had its roots in the English countryside. By the mid 19th century, the idea of picturesque became more and more prevalent in the Indian context as botanical gardens were now being handled by Q-trained superintendents who nurtured them into references for open space planning, design, and management. The following century saw a huge emphasis on horticulture-based outdoor design with introduction of many exotics. Decolonization of the subcontinent was followed by major geopolitical restructuring and was a crucial time for the young nations to demonstrate economic growth and capability. Many international names were brought in to instill the idea of nationalism through architecture. By the 1970s, Indian architects had emerged from the shadow of their foreign masters who had dominated the architectural scene till then. Architecture was now being discussed extensively in the country. There were strong and deliberate attempts to chart a way forward, which looked at both tradition and modernity. The discourse had moved forth from the idea of nation towards a new identity. It was during this time contributions by the first generation of landscape architects led to the foundation of the profession, its pedagogy, sensibilities, ethics, and possibilities of praxis. In the subsequent years, these pioneers constantly guided academia and praxis to make up for the time lost. There were recurrent themes in their works: an ecological basis for design, working with plants and planting design, looking at various anchors for spatial design such as art, aesthetics, memory, and so on, and ideas of nature and garden as public spaces within the city. Nikhil Saini's story needs a mention in this journey. A road inspector for the Public Works Department at Chandigarh and a self-taught artist, distraught by partition, found solace in secretly building a garden in memory of his homeland. He collected industrial waste such as broken crockery, terracotta, bangle waste, etc. from dump yards and created a complex magical world for himself which kept him engrossed for 18 years till it was discovered in 1975. Later on, his work was appreciated greatly and was involved in making a few gardens in the country. The following decade witnessed the next generation of landscape architects who took the discipline to many cities across the country. They showed immense responsibility by constantly expanding the role of the landscape architect. There wasn't a discourse yet. Perhaps there weren't enough projects on ground to critique at that time. A few cities like Delhi, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Mumbai, and Pune played the gathering ground in subsequent years, which made the profession find acceptance across the country well into small residential projects. The 90s saw architecture change the grain of our cities with large footprints and glass facades of corporate, commercial, and public buildings. It was a rushed phase that saw pride in architecture merely standing out no matter how divorced the insert was from its context. It believed in global language while disregarding local traditions and context. The relation between a street and building changed radically due to the scale of built, and there was no real connection to terrain with the introduction of podium gardens, which were a result of growing parking requirement. Many foreign firms found their way into the country during this time. This introduced new software, drawing standards, execution techniques, and planting with high maintenance. These were decisive times. Mounting challenges were to be confronted with a global aesthetic, while we were still under the hangover of a few selectively preserved historic references and some hybrid styles to lean on to. As a profession, we had missed the opportunity to contribute to the larger debate on tradition, modernity, and identity, and were now to grapple with a global style which brought in with it new standards and pressures of quick delivery. Nursery stocks seemed to influence our design thinking, and lawns and palms permeated our spaces. Spirit, nostalgia, rootedness was almost lacking in a race towards universal style. The ability to interpret and engage with our landscapes, manage resources, and narrate a story that resonates with its people was fading out. To see it another way, there were absolutely well executed and good looking projects, but missed the opportunity to re establish the connect with land and seemed disjointed with architecture that wanted to make a statement and stressed on performance. Many a times, the landscape design was not talking to the building or extending the idea of architecture, also because the building didn't. It was merely playing a subservient role to architecture. This decade also brought insistence of new standards of sustainability and green ratings only to add to the chaos. The country also saw a rapid change in size of landscape practices which had the temperament and capability to meet these challenges. There was also an increase in number of practices around this time, a direct relation between opportunity and growth. A few professionals were confident about the future, while some were definitely worried. A state of lament, if we may call it, the intellectual elite of the profession, barring a few who mentored the next generations, lamented in silence over the lack of direction the profession was taking. While the first generation set the scene, the intellectual pace was set only during the last 20 years, that is during the 2000, where there was a deliberate attempt to introspect. While there were a good number of practitioners, lack of dialogue made it difficult to forge a better future or merely correct course. 2001 onwards, Journal of Landscape Architecture by Geeta Wahidua began a concerted effort speaking about the profession. In 2002, it made an attempt to discuss the larger role of a landscape architect, which involved the first generation. In 2005, there was an exclusive issue of Home Review edited by Aniket Bhagwat, which looked at the profession's current state and trajectory thus far and defined many lenses by which one may explore it. It also tried to touch upon the largely ignored aspect of landscape theory in the country. Parallelly, around this time, the Indian Society of Landscape Architects was formed under the aegis of Professor Prabhakar Bhagwat. Since its inception, it has largely helped in bringing all professionals together to have a dialogue. Today, the Society plays an advisory role in betterment of education, code of conduct, mentorship, and many more critical aspects of practice. There has been a visible momentum over the last 2 decades across the country to thrust the profession into new territories, whether it be research, dialogue, academics, or showcasing work. Which brings us to a question: who appoints a landscape architect and when? There are projects where who appoints us and at what stage is directly proportional to the role we play in steering the course of the project. In large land holdings, where the proportion of built is limited, it is essential that the landscape architect be appointed prior or at least along with the architect to encourage a collaborative effort in conceptualizing the master plan with interdisciplinary thinking rather than be called only for problem solving when it's too late. Which reminds me of a question Professor Shahir asked 20 years ago, which still seems relevant. Are architects and planners, the real estate industry, ready to accept and acknowledge our capabilities and foreground our role? Does this profession need to create its own patronage to make its role more effective? Especially in times when our cities are drowning, hills eroding at rapid pace, rivers flooding, and development encroaching further into natural edges. Thank you.